My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverse. It's mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And we're at it again with another MCU franchise thing, which everybody's very excited for. Actually, I feel like this one people were pretty excited for, weren't they?
Yeah, which might factor into why it hasn't performed as well as people might have hoped.
Yeah, it actually did have some weight of expectation, as opposed to the last one. I think Moon Knight, everybody was kind of very ambivalent. I think that's the last thing we covered from the MCU, right? Was Moon Knight?
And I think, it was either that or Doctor Strange.
Oh, yeah. I think people did have some expectations for Doctor Strange, but also there were... I feel like Doctor Strange and Moon Knight both had this idea of people were like, this might not work. Whereas I feel like for Thor, Love and Thunder, it was like, oh no, it's gonna work. It's a Thor movie. They do well. Taika Waititi's back. We're gonna have fun. It's gonna have the Guardians in it. That always usually does well. There was a lot of things going for this movie.
Now, you've been talking about having MCU fatigue for a while, and I'm kind of wondering if
this movie finally tipped you over.
Well, not me necessarily, but like people in general. And I'm really like, I saw a YouTube video where someone was like basically trying to make the case that having all these Disney Plus shows is really, making it so there's too much MCU content.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people who have probably less directly said that, but kind of like, I think we talked about it in the podcast because Disney made an announcement like a couple of weeks ago when they were like, I guess it's probably over a month ago now, but like when they released the schedule for what all the MC, like all the Marvel and all the Star Wars movies and shows that were going to come out in the next 2-3 years. And it was just such a massive list that a lot of people just looked at it and were immediately hit by the fatigue, even without having started to see them.
Yeah, because this year, Moon Knight was out, and then I think Doctor Strange came out before that show was even done. And then 3 weeks or 4 weeks after Doctor Strange came out, then Ms. Marvel came on, and then Ms. Marvel I don't even think was done by the time Thor Love and Thunder came out. And then
I think Ms. Marvel was maybe not. Oh yeah, it was pretty close though. You're right.
And then She-Hulk comes out in like three weeks from now.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing. Actually, I do think that, like, because Mjolnir listens to a lot of podcasts, some of which from the same network that I know you listen to, and I do remember them making that comment too, that at some point, I think it was Mr. Sunday Movie who said that, like, it's going to become so hard to keep up with this, like, basically his job, which was to keep up with all things comics and such, has just become so much harder in the last couple of years because, like, yeah, there's basically no free time anymore if you're somebody who covers comic things, because Marvel is just churning everything out, and DC's trying, but they're still at a pace that somebody could keep up with feasibly.
Yeah, and again, it makes me feel like the actual comic book industry, where there's very few people who actually follow every single comic. They just follow the ones they like, and then they'll show up for the crossover thing. So perhaps we're beyond the point of expecting fans of the MCU to watch every single thing.
Perhaps. I honestly, I feel like it's almost like I recently, because I do watch The Boys. I recently read the comic run, and it was this kind of thing where the one of the major differences between the comics and the show is that the show is very much in our universe, where it's movies and TV shows and podcasts and videos that are being done about superheroes, whereas like in graphic novel The Boys, it is all about the comic industry controlling our perception of superheroes. And I thought it was kind of, yeah, we are really getting to that point where it's like, I don't think they very seldom mention like comic books in the TV show The Boys. They just kind of acknowledge they exist, but that's not what people know superheroes through. It's like advertising and movies. And we are definitely hitting that point,
Yeah.
like in our world, where that's where most people now know superheroes from.
Well, even for myself, like I've always said I'm a fan of the Arrowverse, and it reached a point where there were just too many shows for me to watch them all. So I sort of just stuck to the few that I really liked, and then I enjoyed the other characters when there was a crossover. You're just like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I don't know what's going on here.
To be
Yeah.
fair, though, it is a little bit better than like the manga/anime industry, because they don't even have crossovers. They're just all individual things. So, I mean, there are sometimes crossover episodes, but it's like it's an alternate universe kind of thing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when the Dragon Ball Z One Piece Toriko crossover episode was just like a random one-off adventure for all the characters. It had nothing to do with the main storyline for anybody.
So it's interesting you mentioned The Boys, because I've heard people kind of say like they've had to kind of stop watching because it's just getting too dark for them.
If we do an episode, on The Boys, maybe we should put that in the batch jar, because the last season has. I mean, I think famously, Carl Urban, one of the main actors for it, has said that if you're getting a new actor in and getting him to make phone calls to the director because he feels uncomfortable, you're on the right track. Because apparently for the latest season, Jensen Ackles came into the show from Supernatural, and he made some phone calls to the director because he was feeling too uncomfortable with some of the scenes that he had to film. So yeah, I can imagine it's somewhere in there. Might be worth putting into the bad jar. I enjoy it very much, but it is definitely not for everybody.
So Lee, little do you remember, we did have an episode 216 back in March of 2021. We did do The Boys, but at that
Yeah.
point, season 3 had not come out.
I don't think season 2 had come out by that point, had it?
I think it had, because it mentioned. I'm looking at the little description we have for it. It says
Okay.
spoilers for the first 2 seasons of The Boys.
Yeah, I guess there was just a big gap because of COVID between the season 2 and season 3.
Yeah. Because you've been under the weather, so you have not had the chance to run out to the theaters and see Thor: Love and Thunder. But I do recall you saying you were interested in this one.
Yeah, well, for most of the reasons we talked about when we said that there were actual expectations on this movie, I think I was part of that. I think the big draw for me was to see what shenanigans Taika Waititi would be up to.
So
And
you're actually a fan of him. Like, can you explain to me his appeal? Because I don't know. I just don't think I get it.
I don't know. I think it's just a New Zealand thing. Like, have you ever watched Flight of the Conchords?
I've seen promotions for it.
Because I don't know, they have like a sense of humor that is fairly similar to like a British sense of humor, a little bit absurdist, a little bit irreverent, and I think I think generally, like, I'm talking about Flight of the Conchord because he does know the creators, fairly well, and has worked with them before, and I don't know, they have a similar kind of sense of humor, and it is, I don't know, just offbeat, kind of absurdist, and mostly I think it's just the feeling that they don't take themselves too seriously. Um,
And you
is the
enjoy
big
that.
one.
You enjoy that
Yeah, I
element.
think like not, and that's the thing, not for everything and not always. But I think that's where specifically the appeal of Taika Waititi comes from, is that he tends to, like, he does kind of do one big movie, one small movie. He alternates kind of larger projects with smaller personal projects that he enjoys, and I think that as a creator, it keeps him making things that are kind of on brand more often. Um, so yeah, that, I think that's generally the appeal. Because I don't know, it's the not taking yourself too seriously is something I've always enjoyed. Like, it's what Monty Python had. It's what, to some extent, as an artist, David Bowie had, and like, you just, when you sense that somebody is enjoying what they're doing, I think you put up with certain possible differences in quality. Not that there always is, but if there is, it's easier to put up with it, I find, if there's more passion put into it.
Okay, that's going to be helpful to frame this conversation because I think people's ability to enjoy this new Thor movie really comes down to how much you enjoy Taika Waititi.
Uh, yeah, I had a feeling there might be something. Is it kind of to the extent of like how, is it similar to how the latest Doctor Strange did kind of depend on how much you enjoyed Sam Raimi, in a
Yeah, that
sense?
that's a good comparison.
Yeah.
But okay, so Thor: Love and Thunder is the fourth Thor movie. Thor is the first MCU character to have 4 solo films, and considering the
That's true.
fact
Iron
that
Man
they're
never got his fourth.
yeah, Iron Man didn't get a fourth. I mean, Captain America is getting a fourth movie, but it's with Sam Wilson, so I don't know if you count that as the same. Like, would you consider the new Captain America movie with Sam Wilson like the fourth Captain America movie, or would you consider it like the first in like a new series?
I think I'd consider it the first in a new series. Like, not to say he's not Captain America, but like, it is definitely entering a new era. Kind of how like the next Thor movie is gonna be, unless I've missed something completely, Jane is gonna be Thor in the next movie. So, or
Yeah,
from this
that's
movie
that's how you
onwards.
know you have not seen Thor: Love and Thunder.
Okay, but you know, when, if she still takes over as Thor, then it will be different. But I, at least at the beginning, or the beginning premise of this is that it's still the same Thor, who's still in the same continuity, and this, played by the same actor, and in and out of universe.
Meaning to say that Chris Hemsworth is Thor.
Yeah, and it's the same Thor that you had from the beginning. It's you know
Oh, that's interesting you say that because I've heard people say they feel like the Thor character has changed since the beginning. So let's talk very
okay.
briefly. Like, what did you think of the first Thor movie?
I Man, it's been a while since I first Thor movie. I did see the first Thor movie in theaters. It was like one of
Directed
the
by
first.
Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah, it was. I feel like it was one of the stronger movies of the first phase of the MCU, but it did kind of I don't know. It felt a little bit like things were going very quickly.
Mm.
I know a lot of people were like disappointed at some of the aspects of it, but I think like it did a very good job. It introduced Loki, who would become a major player in the MCU, and they were kind of, I think they were aiming at that anyways. But I don't know. I feel like it was still very much early days MCU, and so it, like, upon rewatching it, it didn't hit me as hard as it did the first time. But it was definitely a fun movie and a pretty good one at the time. Like, when I first remember watching it, and I enjoyed it, but it didn't like make Thor one of my favorite Avengers or anything.
I would consider Thor the most surprising movie of Phase 1 for me because I think Thor was probably the character I cared the absolute least about. But this promise of this shared universe and the fact that like Coulson was going to be in the movie got me interested in. And I actually remember being like really surprised, like pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed Thor. I thought, I think, I think if I think about it now, the first Avenger, Captain America, is probably still my favorite Phase 1 MCU movie. But I think Thor might actually be, I mean, outside of the Avengers itself, I would say, yeah, Thor was probably a close second.
Yeah, like it was a good movie.
And then we
And
have Thor: The Dark World, which many people
considered
before,
to be like the worst
yeah, like
MCU movie. Actually, there's still people who say it's the worst MCU movie flat out.
yeah, I was gonna say before Eternals came out, people pointed towards Thor: The Dark World as the worst MCU movie. I've only ever actually seen it once. I saw it.
Yeah.
I saw it when I saw it in theaters, and
Okay.
I don't remember hating it, but I don't remember like obviously wanting to go back and rewatch it.
See, the thing is, I did not see it in theaters. In fact, I did not see Thor: The Dark World until last year.
Oh wow! So like post
Before-
having seen Endgame.
Hmm?
Post like you didn't see Thor: The Dark World until after you'd already seen Avengers Endgame.
No, because I was late at watching. I didn't see Endgame in theaters. So but that is why I watched Thor: The Dark World, because when Endgame was, at least I don't think I saw. No, I didn't see it in theaters. Yeah, because when Endgame was on, it got on Disney Plus. Mjolnir made me watch all the MCU movies in order before it. Well, it didn't make me. We decided to do it, and so that was the time I saw Thor: The Dark World, was in preparation for watching Endgame, because we were just watching all of them. And like, yeah, I don't know. I don't remember hating it, but I don't remember particularly liking it. Like, I do remember a lot of it did feel kind of contrived, and like the story seemed weirder than some of the other Marvel movies. And I do remember, the one thing I do remember was that, like, oh, they really shoot in the Infinity Saga into it, almost like almost as an afterthought, it seemed.
Yep,
Because the Ether became an Infinity Stone, and it was like, really? Okay. You set it up as being something completely different for the entire movie. So it kind of feels weird that it suddenly is that. I know Mjolnir has a soft spot in her heart for that movie because it has a lot of Loki moments and a lot of like character growth and like character moments between Loki and Thor that she really enjoys. But yeah, it was a strange movie.
I learned recently that Loki actually wasn't even going to be in Thor: The Dark World originally, but because he was received so well in the Avengers, they kind of like made adjustments to incorporate his character.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that kind of points towards it. I feel like Thor: The Dark World was supposed to be a completely different movie, and then they wanted to shoe in the Infinity Saga, and then they wanted to add Loki into it, and they just ended up making a very different movie than I think what they set out to make.
Well, yeah, you might also not know that Patty Jenkins, who went on to direct the Wonder Woman movies, was originally signed on to direct Thor: The Dark World, and then she ran into creative conflicts with Marvel, so she backed out. And then Alan Taylor, who is famous for directing TV episodes of Game of Thrones and Terminator Genesis, stepped into the production to finish the film.
Yeah, well, yeah, because that was in the time period where Disney/Marvel had very specific ideas of what they wanted to do, and if directors didn't do exactly what they wanted, they would just can them. Because that's in the same time period that we're supposed to get
Edgar Wright
directing Ant-Man, and then he left as well for creative differences. So,
and then,
yeah, I don't know.
And then 4 years, like there was a 2-year gap between the first two Thor movies, and then it was like 4 years later in 2017 we got Thor Ragnarok, which took the series. It almost felt like a soft reboot. I distinctly remember our episode on Thor Ragnarok, which obviously this was before you were on the podcast. But I made the comment that it felt like they were completely trying to like erase all the elements of the original Thor series, and that was like doing like it was like almost like a comic book reboot or like a retcon, because like most of the cast from the first two Thor movies end up dead by the end. Like the hammer's gone, Asgard's gone. Like you really felt like by the end it's like a totally different series. And for a lot of people who didn't care for the first Thor or the second Thor for that matter, it was like a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh yes, like I'm interested in this character again.
I feel like particularly because Dark World existed, that reboot aspect got a better reception than it might have otherwise. Because, but the thing is also, like, that was also Chris Hemsworth's point of view at that point. Like, he had gotten kind of sick of the way Thor was in the movies and wanted to take it in a different direction too. Like, he was very open about that, and like, but I also feel like, for better or for worse, it kind of brought Thor a little bit more on level with the MCU. And I say for better or for worse because you do have that thing like in the Avengers where, he is slightly quippy, like the whole like, that's my brother you're talking about, and then he was adopted. But it felt a little more like he was the clumsy, out of place guy. And this movie definitely kind of worked to fix that, to make him a lot less of the one Avenger who doesn't know what's going on, and kind of just gave him a bit more of a personality instead. Which, again, like, you might not like the kind of personality he got, but at the same time, he did get more personality and was a little bit less of just a wet blanket, which he kind of was. No, even in his own movie, like, it wasn't terrible in Thor, but in the Dark World, it definitely was. And then I think it had carried over to Avengers, and so it was. I don't know. It felt like I enjoyed it, obviously, and I thought that it was a good new direction. But I can understand that it did kind of, yeah. If you were a fan of the older Thor movies, or the way Thor, even just the way Thor was portrayed, even if you didn't like the movies, I can understand why that was like a big difference that probably hit people as a little bit jarring.
It came out the same year as Guardians Volume 2, and my criticism of both of those movies was that, you can have comedy in these movies, like they don't have to be humorless, but they're in both Guardians 2 and Thor Ragnarok. There were moments where, something dramatic is happening, something that you should be feeling an emotion about is happening on screen, and then the moment is ruined by a joke. And as a fan of comic books and superheroes, that really makes me mad in those moments, because it suggests to me that these filmmakers, it's like, haha, look at this silly superhero thing. Like, there's no space for real emotional connection or pathos here. It's just, haha, let's make fun of it.
Yeah, somewhat. I feel like Ragnarok had a bit more of that problem, I personally feel, than Volume 2, because, I don't know, Volume 2 still had that scene with Drax and Mantis that was, I don't know, I thought was just the perfect level of not getting undercut. But I also think that, like, I don't know, I feel like it both those movies were better at having like a slightly more subtle way of conveying emotions, because I think they still hit good emotional beats, because, even just like the conversation between Korg and Thor about his hammer and how important it was to him did kind of seem like it did still, like it was still fit as an emotional moment and as character growth for Thor. And I think that, like, even though it was being facilitated by the comic relief character, I still enjoyed it, and I still thought it was a good kind of character moment that allowed you to connect with him on a deeper level. But I do understand undercutting it, and I do understand, especially as a bigger fan of comics, that being a problem. But that being said, I think that is also what helped some of those movies stave off the Marvel fatigue. It was like, no, these are a little funnier, these are a little different, people don't take them as seriously.
Yeah, so obviously they're just not designed for me, and
Yeah.
that's okay. Thor Ragnarok ends with Thor like he's like, yes, I'm going to be the ruler of my people. Like we're going to establish a new home for the Asgardians. You know, it seems like he's really coming into his own. He's like developed his lightning powers without really needing a weapon. And then Infinity War happens.
Yeah, like
And he immediately getting like massacred by Thanos, and he like has to like go on a quest to like find a new weapon for himself.
it's one of those things. Like everybody talks about how like Loki's character was weird in that moment, right? Like because he stabs, you know, Thanos, but not from behind, and like there's the whole like problem with that as his character. But like, yeah, nobody really talks about the fact that that one scene just undoes all the character development of Thor Ragnarok, and like not completely, but again slightly reboots him.
And then you get Avengers Endgame, and he's got an entirely different like character arc in that one,
Yeah,
which I
yeah.
enjoyed. I actually really enjoyed the fact that like he
You
felt
like
so.
Fat Thor?
I liked like not
The
just because he
cons.
was
Yeah, yeah.
the idea that he like feels so traumatized by like basically like not defeating Thanos that he like becomes depressed and becomes Fat Thor. And then by the end of the movie, kind of coming around to that and saying like, oh, I'm still worthy, like I still am this person regardless of the mistakes I've made.
Yeah, I think that the big and that's kind of why it felt a little, I don't know, strange that was kind of where they went with it, because I don't know, they were giving him more levity and then more responsibility, and then they kind of like move the responsibility to something different. And I don't know if that, I think it is a little bit emblematic of what happens when a character has too many movies too, because it is definitely one of the problems that people had with, you know, the Iron Man franchise, or like the Iron Man part of the MCU, was that like Tony Stark seemed like a different character and seemed like the character development he did undergo didn't stick from one movie to another.
And
If
this
that
this
makes sense.
this again is like a comic book problem where you have
Yeah,
characters that are being written by different writers in different series, and like to try and maintain consistency across all of that. It's it's difficult, and we're running the same problem. Like the people writing the Avengers movies are not the same ones writing the Thor movies. So I don't think Taika Waititi, maybe he did know what was going to be happening in Infinity War when they created Ragnarok, but
I
certainly
wouldn't be surprised if he knew and just didn't care, to be honest. But I also wouldn't be surprised that if he didn't know, because that still is a pretty common thing for like directors to be like, yeah, no, we didn't know this was happening, and or Marvel told us to change this because they were changing something else, so we had to like make adjustments at the last minute,
yeah.
and
And
that's
then
not
by the end
always.
of Endgame, he's like, "Oh, I don't want, I was never meant to be king. Like Valkyrie, you be king, and I'm gonna go discover myself." And I was really excited, honestly, for a movie with him and the Guardians, because the scenes they had together in both Infinity War and Endgame, like I felt they had really good chemistry and played off each other well, and I was like, yes, I want to see that movie.
Yeah.
But
So I'm assuming from what you're saying that the Thor: Love and Thunder was not that movie.
no, let's get in. We're finally here talking about Thor: Love and Thunder. Beeper, based on the promotions you've seen, like what do you think would go on the Blu-ray case description for this one?
Oh my gosh! See, that's the thing. Based on the Blu-ray, I still thought that's the movie we would get.
Are you packed? A hand grenade. Portable speaker.
Thor: Love and Thunder is a heartfelt superhero jam.
Look who it is!
It's an epic adventure.
Yes!
Massive, sensational.
Another classic Thor adventure.
The best Thor film yet.
This ends here and now!
I'm counting on them. Thor: Love and Thunder, rated PG-13.
Awesome.
Ain't that the truth? In theaters tomorrow.
In a world where the snap has happened, Thanos has been defeated, and a lot of other crazy stuff has happened, Thor is going off to find himself with the Guardians while trying to not make Star-Lord too jealous of him again. And I think there's somebody who's trying to kill the gods.
All right, well that's yeah. The description from Box Office Mojo says Thor enlists the help of Valkyrie, Korg, and ex-girlfriend Jane Foster to fight Gore the God Butcher, who intends to make the gods extinct.
Oh, okay.
So yeah,
But yeah, the promotional material didn't really push that.
Well, once
Or
again,
maybe,
this is
maybe I only watched the first trailer and not the other ones, but like the first trailer definitely felt like it was going to be Thor hanging out with the Guardians, maybe trying some LSD or, something similar to find who he is.
Yeah, so this was not the movie I wanted to get. I wanted a movie where, it was like the Asgardians of the Galaxy, as Thor called them. And I know that like Guardians Volume 3 was meant to come out before Thor 4, but then with the whole James Gunn getting fired thing, it kind of like shifted the production order around. But even if that hadn't happened, I think it's the same problem. It's like, I don't think James Gunn was particularly keen on like telling a Guardians movie with Thor in it. I don't think that Taika Waititi wanted to do a Thor movie with the Guardians in it. So the movie I wanted to see, I don't think anyone was interested in making, even though it's
the movie that was promised.
Yeah, like that's what the Endgame people promised us. And I'm kind of like, because here's the thing, like I guess this is a spoiler, but whatever. The Guardians are in like one scene.
Yeah, and it's not like they have the excuse they used to have, when the MCU was starting, where they would just throw all the cameos and see what sticks, because that that in like in Iron Man, like before they had done things, they'd alluded to a bunch of things that may or may not happen, but nobody was expecting them to follow through on all of them. Whereas now, it is one company in charge of it. They all could, get some level of coordination and make things happen, but they still don't. And it does get a little frustrating, but I'm sure it's frustrating for the people in charge of making the movies as well, right? Like, and possibly even like, possibly for the actors as well, just to be constantly having to change what's going on, what your character is, like how they react, and then having one thing being shown or promised and then having to play a different thing altogether. It's got to be like, I think what I'm saying is like, I think the fans aren't the only ones getting kind of the short end of the stick here.
So people in my life have been asking me, "Oh, what did you think of the movie?" And my response is like, "It was okay. It made me laugh at parts. Like I didn't dislike the movie, but then it certainly after the fact, like the more you think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, like that was weird, or oh, like that didn't make sense, or oh, I don't think I like that." And this, like, even Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has 67%, which means that like, yeah, more critics had a positive than a negative review. But it's not nearly like Thor: The Dark World has like 65% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah. So, but I think it's also just a more polarizing. Maybe it's just it's more polarizing, not necessarily lesser quality. Is that?
Yeah, and some YouTuber comedians that I like, I watched the movie reviews. They just didn't think the movie was funny. Like for them, the jokes didn't land in the same way, and I was surprised by that because I'm like, well, I thought it was still funny, but it's just telling me that like, yeah, it's a polarizing experience. Not everyone, like Ragnarok kind of had some special sauce on it for whatever reason that like everyone seemed to think it was funny. This one, seemingly it's much more hit or miss if you think it's funny or not.
That's fair for a movie. Like, humor is subjective, but also I feel like, I don't know, people are just being more polarizing or polarized, and so it might just come down to that as well. But I mean, the MCU again, is kind of hitting those problems of people being, excited about something and then getting something else and getting, I don't know. I feel like you said, if it's not the movie we were promised or we were expecting, it makes sense that people might, not appreciate the humor or just not be ready for it, because I think, again, if you went into it expecting some kind of James Gunn humor because it has the Guardians, you'll be disappointed. And if you go into it expecting it to just have Taika Waititi, you might also be disappointed. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but like, I think it's definitely, if the movie is not what people were expecting, there's a higher chance that they might be more critical about it instead of accepting what was there, if that makes sense. Like, I
Yeah,
feel like
this is
with,
very
with
Taika
Thor,
Waititi.
okay.
Like, people are now asking for Taika Waititi to not be involved in future Thor movies.
All right, fair enough. Well, maybe they got what they deserved by maybe they've gone so far. Marvel has just gone so far the other way. They've become DC, and
Well,
they're
it's
giving their directors too much power, and then they'll give them not enough, and then
so this movie is relatively short. Like, it's just under 2 hours long, but apparently they shot just over 4 hours of footage. They did a whole bunch of improv. There's whole scenes where they actually brought back Peter Dinklage and Jeff Goldblum, like reprising their roles from the previous Marvel movies, and they ended up cutting them out because they decided they they didn't need to be there. And now people are like, well, Taika Waititi cut, like, let's see the extended version. And he's been very adamant. It's like, this is the version that, like, we get. Like, he doesn't like putting deleted scenes on even DVDs and stuff, because from his perspective, it's like, what you got is what the movie was.
well, especially when you are a director who does a lot of improv, ultimately what you cut should be what you want.
And as the fact they shot 4 hours worth of footage, apparently this is one of the most expensive MCU movies ever made, because they spend so much time and money making all this footage. And box office wise, like, it's done better than the other Thor movies on the front end. Like, I had the highest opening weekend for a Thor movie, but it's like Minions 2 has made more money collectively so far than this one has. So Marvel might actually end up losing money on this because it costs so much to make.
Oh wow. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of crazy, but I don't know. I mean, and that's the thing, is that I probably will enjoy it, uh, because I do like Taika Waititi a lot, I also specifically like the idea of um, the MCU not fully feeling like the MCU anymore. So I think that I would probably enjoy it, but I don't know. It sounds it
I'll give
sounds
you a
like this actually weirdly makes me want to maybe want to watch it more.
okay, like, I'll give you an example of a joke in the movie that a lot of people seem to dislike.
All right.
So New Asgard has become like a tourist attraction, and in the town you see an ice cream shop that has, like, on the storefront of it, an infinity gauntlet, and it's called Infinity Cone.
Okay.
And on the surface, like, haha, that's funny, because it's like a reference to their movie and the whole idea of the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity Stones. And then I watched a YouTuber called Captain Midnight. Like, he's like, just think about that. Like, this tragic event that basically, like, killed half the universe is now, like, just there as, like, the name of an ice cream shop to be, like, played as a joke. And it's like, who would find that funny? Like, wouldn't so many people have, like, intense trauma even just thinking about the idea of the Infinity Gauntlet?
Probably, yeah.
But when I watched the movie, I was like, haha, that's funny. Infinity, whatever. Infinity scoops.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think it is just a funny joke. I think it's funny, but I do understand why, in the context, people might not enjoy that joke or be like, "Oh, it was too much." And I think, again, it goes to what we were talking about earlier of, like, directors not taking the MCU too seriously, which, yeah, I enjoy, but I understand why people would get very annoyed by it.
Like, some people in the reviews have gone as far as say, like, this borderlines on parody.
Hmm. Is that a bad thing though? I don't know. I feel like
Well, I don't
we're
like
due
that. I
we're
like
due for
superhero
a
stories
parody.
when the characters are taken seriously and the world is taken seriously.
Yeah.
Like, things like Deadpool, where it is basically like one big, it's meant to be a comedy and whatnot. Like, that's fine, I guess. But again, brings to the problem with the Thor franchise, if you will, is that it's inconsistent, I guess, in who likes what.
Yeah, but and yeah, I think there it does have at least a little bit to do with you know, it is the series that has the most movies in it, and because it was a very similar thing with Iron Man's treatment, was that there was a lot of difference in the movies, and so people didn't know what to think about it.
Christian Bale plays the villain in this, Gore the God Butcher, and for the scenes that he has, like he's very good. A lot of people, including myself, would have liked to see more of him in the movie, and we'll talk about in the spoilerverse. But they do something with his character that basically like turns him into like a mustache twirling bad guy, where he could have been a very sympathetic villain.
But they decided to just.
Twirl the
Yeah, I
mustache.
vaguely remember hearing kind of people talk about that and explaining that like he kind of had a point and then he didn't.
Yeah. So, and then Thor's character arc, like if we talked about like his journey throughout the movies, where he is at the beginning of this movie, where he is at the end of this movie, it's not consistent, and you kind of have to just almost turn your brain off, be like, okay, like just think of him in relation to the last movie he was in. Like, don't think about the others, because it'll stop making sense very quickly.
Yeah.
And Natalie Portman returns. She's in this movie. We'll have to let's just go into the spoilerverse. There'll be a time code in the description of the episode where you can skip around if you don't want spoilers for the movie. All right, so Gore the God Butcher, he the opening scene of the movie, you meet him and you discover that his daughter essentially dies of starvation because the god that he prays to doesn't answer his prayers, and then he ends up meeting his god, and then his god is sort of laughing and be like, like I didn't know anyone still prayed to me. And so Gore ends up getting this sword that can kill gods, and he kills his god, and then that sets him off on his whole I'm going to kill all the gods thing. So, very, very emotional, very sympathetic story, and then you meet a bunch of other gods in this movie. Like you meet Zeus and you meet a bunch of other, deities. And yeah, for the most part, you're like, yeah, Gore, I think you're right. Like none of these gods deserve to live. They're all terrible people and whatever. But then what they do to make him like more of a mustache twirler is they have him kidnap all of the children of New Asgard to like basically draw out Thor. And he turns into like the Penguin from Batman Returns, where he's like, I'm going to kill all the kids and
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's. I think I do. I don't know. It just. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when. I'm terrible with names of minor characters.
describe them.
Dreadlocks and Green Cloak sorcerer.
Heimdall?
No. In Doctor Strange.
Oh, Mordo.
Yeah, when Mordo is like, there's two, we have to kill all the sorcerers, and then just never shows up again or never does anything about it. Like, at least this guy did something about it, but then it does seem a little bit like it would be, I don't know. It's something you could do something interesting with, where he just kind of like gets to the point where he sees a god that, sacrifices himself for his people and is like, oh, maybe I should have been a little more discerning in this.
Yeah.
And then stops or joins or does something, interesting to have him double down, like, because it also seems like weird as far as motivation. He's like, oh yeah, gods are all selfish, so I'm going to capture these kids. So, and then if Thor is like, okay, I'll sacrifice myself for the kids, it should trigger something in him.
Well, he wants to kill Thor because Thor is a god. And so he's like, all right. And then he needs Stormbreaker, the axe, because the axe can essentially open this portal that will get him access to this creature called the Infinity that will grant him a wish, and he wants to wish for all gods to be destroyed. So he's like drawing out Thor because he wants basically to kill him and take his axe.
Right.
So yeah, like this, he's kind of like Killmonger from Black Panther, where it's like actually he's right, but then they like have him like choke some people, and it's like, oh, like you're bad guy. So it was very disappointing in that respect. But for what he had, he was like, Christian Bale's a great actor.
Yeah. Okay.
So Jane Foster is very much not set up to replace him as Thor in this. Like she dies at the end, and in a post credit scene they show her in Valhalla.
Okay. Well, that could be a setup for her becoming a god once she's in Valhalla.
I suppose, but it's weird. Like I feel like this was just some way to try and pull Natalie Portman back into these movies, because the whole Jane Foster becoming Thor story from the comics, like that's not what happens here. Like she still has cancer, but they write it into they retcon it to say like, oh, when Thor and Jane were dating, he like mentions the Mjolnir's like, oh, make sure you always protect Jane. And so she goes to New Asgard where they have the remnants of Mjolnir, and somehow Mjolnir can detect the fact that she's dying. So the Mjolnir can kind of like, it reconstitutes itself and then gives her the ability to turn into, like her version of Thor.
Yeah. Okay.
So very different from the comics where like Thor Odinson becomes unworthy of the power of Thor, and Jane, who is still a cancer patient in the comics, literally becomes Thor. It was really weird having them both there. It's like, what? Like, how is Mjolnir functioning? And like, he's still hung up on the fact that Mjolnir is there, but that's like, but then you have Stormbreaker, but then also like your whole thing with like in the Ragnarok, you didn't need a weapon. Yeah, there were some fun moments with her being there, and like they kind of play up the fact that Stormbreaker is jealous of the fact that like Thor is kind of like wants Mjolnir back, and like it's weird. That was a new thing too. Like they have sentience on the level of like Doctor Strange's cloak. The weapons do. I mean,
okay. Again, it sounds like it was just kind of like, I don't know, things happening for the sake of things happening, but
yeah, like after the children gets kidnapped, they're on Earth, like they're in New Asgard, and he's like, oh, like we're gonna go recruit a team of gods to help us fight him, and I'm like, or you could call any like 30 of the superheroes on this planet that you have contact information for, instead of like trying to recruit gods that you have no idea if they'll actually help you or not.
yeah, especially because like, I don't know, I'm pretty sure Thor kind of knows that the other gods are mostly jerks, and that this guy is probably right in 80 to 90% of cases, right?
It was just like really bad, because like when a Thor movie's set in space or something, it makes sense there's not other heroes around, but it's like they literally like shot themselves in the foot by having like these major parts of the plot happen on Earth. So it's like there's no, they didn't pay any lip service to try and explain where other characters were unavailable to help.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's kind of a strange one. Also, as far was the sword also sentient?
Kind of. I mean, it's they draw a parallel between Gore and Jane, because the sword that is used to kill gods, basically it slowly kills its host, and the idea is that like once over a period of years the sword will kill its host and then have a new one, in the same way that Mjolnir granting like Thor power to Jane is essentially like unintentionally accelerating her cancer. So they do draw a parallel there. And in the comic books, apparently Gore's sword is like was like owned by the king of the symbiotes.
Okay, interesting. Don't think we're gonna have that crossover.
No, like they definitely wrote around.
No, I was just thinking. I was gonna ask if the sword is an extremely naive person who thinks war is a terrible thing until she lives through World War II and does nothing. Yeah, that was the joke I was setting up.
Right. Yeah, it's like there's some cool action scenes. There's one scene that's like set all in black and white. The movie, in an interesting way, like it really retcons Thor and Jane's relationship to make it seem like they were much more in love with each other, and it was like a lot harder of a breakup than I remembered it being, like having seen them in the other movies. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, this little like montage makes me care more about their relationship than any of the other movies ever did.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the end, Gore gets to access Infinity, but Thor convinces him to not, wipe out all gods, and so he uses his one wish to bring his daughter back to life. And then he dies because the sword has sucked him up, and then Jane dies, and so Thor commits to basically becoming this girl's father.
Okay.
And that's where the movie ends, is that like he's raising this girl. She's able to hold Mjolnir, so they're the love and thunder.
Oh, I see.
And this little girl is played by Chris Hemsworth's daughter in real life, so I have no idea if this is their way of trying to like launch her acting career, if it was just meant to be like a fun cameo.
Hopefully just a fun cameo.
And yeah, and the other annoying thing too is like, Thor. So like Thor in the original movie, he wanted to be king, right? And he's deemed not worthy, and that's why he has to go through like his journey of discovering humility and whatnot. And then Avengers Thor 2, he's accepting the fact that I'm not ready to be king yet, but I want to be a good man. I want to like protect the people, and I want to like, I want to protect and serve and earn their respect. And then Thor Ragnarok, he has this existential crisis because his hammer is destroyed. And he doesn't know who he is without Mjolnir. And then by the end, he's like, yes, I'm king now. Ha ha ha. And then this one, they like montage it to show like, oh, it's been a number of months since he's been with the Guardians, and yet he like seems to be like a peaceful person now, doesn't really like fighting anymore. He only like fights when he absolutely has to. And you see him in this movie like giving speeches, talking to people, like providing encouragement to the kids when they're scared, and you're like, yeah, like you are betraying behavior of a king, like of a person who is worthy of the leadership you sought so much in the original movie. But then it ends with him just basically like becoming like this like, dad. Like, and he's not, like, again, like he's not seemingly interested in like being the leader of his people. He's just like, I'm just gonna raise this kid now.
Yeah, I mean, that's odd because you'd think that the character development might be more in line with what... Well, it sounds like it is until the end, in line with what it was in Thor Ragnarok, but then kind of changes at the last minute.
Yeah. Any? Do you have any questions that are spoilery before we wrap her up?
I don't think so. Like I said, I think I'll still check it out. It sounds at least, like it'll be fun, like entertaining, if not an amazing movie. And at this point, I'm settling for that for Marvel.
Coming around now to final thoughts. For me, Thor: Love and Thunder is an okay movie, and I think this is the problem that the MCU and superhero movies have in general, is that there's so many superhero movies, people are getting tired of them, and the more of them that just come out okay, like, and not great, this will be the slow death of the superhero movie. I was able to enjoy it, but I think I've articulated a number of reasons why I didn't necessarily enjoy it as much as some of the other movies. And it suffers a lot of the same problems that comic book creators have. Like the MCU is large enough now that it does feel more like the comic book world, in that writers have to work a whole lot harder to keep character arcs consistent and write stories that don't contain any plot holes. And I feel for them. I definitely couldn't have written a better story for this movie that wouldn't have addressed all my issues. So I realize I'm very difficult to please. The movie did make me laugh, although it's certainly yeah. I guess I'm just gonna slap this guy, Thor: Love and Thunder, with 2.7 out of 4 bat cookies.
Okay. I think I'll reserve my judgment. I think again, that's interesting, but I do think, like, I don't know, we might have a discussion about that more and more. I think it might be worth talking about that specifically. Like, has Marvel stretched themselves so thin that they will start seeing diminishing profits on properties, but overall more profit? Because I think that's kind of where the comic book industry is at. That, like, they're still making more money than they used to to some extent, but it's not in the same way or with the same properties that they used to. So I'm going to give it I still want to see this because it sounds like fun, out of 4 bad cookies.
So Thor, Love and Thunder is now in theaters. And if you're one of the people that will wait for it to be on Disney Plus, I think the same 45-day rule applies. So that means that it'll be on Disney Plus by like late August.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
All right. So next week, I'm actually going to be traveling for, what's it called? The long weekend. So I will be out of province and away from my normal setup. So I think Beeper, we're actually just going to skip a week. And then we'll come back Monday, August 8th with our Scooby-Doo episode.
Yeah, we will.
That's been pulled out of the Bat Jar for a while now. So come on back to the Bat Jar Podcast in 2 weeks when we talk about the Scooby-Doo franchise. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
See you later.